Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Stephen Gaines. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Would you mind introducing yourself to my audience out there?
Sure. So I'm a writer, and I started my one of my first jobs was writing about rock and roll for the New York Daily News. And since then, I've written, I don't know, about 15 books, maybe even more. And many of them have been biographies about either rock stars or fashion designers. But rock and roll was my first love. So those are my favorite books to write.
I saw that you wrote about the Beach Boys and the Beatles, and I reached out to you about the Beach Boys, but I'm interested in why did you choose the Beach Boys and the Beatles? Like you write two, those are the two most popular bands, at least if you're talking about like what's come back more in culture or what's lived throughout more in culture. They're kind of some really big influences for either older generations like my parents, and then even for my generation loves the Beach Boys. I mean, I live in a beach town, so everything's kind of hippy dippy and a little bit of a mix of all in between.
Somebody asked me why I did the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and I said I was going alphabetically. I was going to go back to ABBA, and then that's why that happened. Um, so um, so I was a rock and roll critic for the New York Sunday News, and the Stigwood organization, Robert Stigwood organization, RSO Records, who like had Eric Clapton, and they produced Jesus Christ Superstar on Broadway and a whole bunch of other things. They were doing something called Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band on the Road, which was a terrible idea. But it was like a little off-Broadway show, which was going to go from city to city. But Peter Brown, who had worked with the Beatles when they were the Beatles, and he was from Liverpool and been an intrinsic part of it. He was at that point president of the Robert Stigwood organization. So he convinced John Lennon to come to a rehearsal of this terrible show, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and to speak to 10 journalists, just 10 journalists, because John didn't want to do this, but he was doing it as a favor for Peter Brown. So I got online with all the other journalists, and I was frightened to death. I really was. I'd interviewed a lot of famous rock stars and a lot of famous people for the other books, but there's something really very, very different about meeting the Beatles. You know that not only are they legend, but how talented they are and how rich, and it's just they're historic. 200 years from now, they're going to be playing Beatles music and still talking about them. So when I got up to the front to John, I was just so tongue-tied. And I said something pretty dumb to him. I said, "Does it make you feel old to see Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band become an off-Broadway show?" And he said to me, "I don't need that, mate, to make me feel old. Next." And that was my one question with him. So Peter Brown, who was there, um, he took me aside and he told me, I didn't use this in the piece I was writing, and he told me his story about coming from Liverpool and his association with the Beatles and how he became involved. And so I said to him when I left that day, "Peter Brown, if you ever write a book about the Beatles, please ask me to write it for you." And he said, "Never. It won't happen. The people from Liverpool, it's a murder. That's a secret thing. We're never going to betray each other and we're never going to say anything." And then guess what? About 7 years went by and the whole situation seemed to change. And Peter Brown called me and said that he was living in Laguna Beach, in a penthouse apartment with 3 bedrooms. And he was thinking about writing that book. And when I moved to Laguna Beach for a month or two and write this proposal. So I did. I jumped on a plane, not knowing more about the Beatles than your average guy. I knew Yoko had this role and Cynthia had that role and stuff. And then it was fascinating. He had all these papers and articles and memories of what happened with the Beatles and the true story behind it, and I just loved it. And when you're a writer, if you're doing something that you're assigned to do, you don't really want to do it. You try to do it your best. But this was a gift. I was so enthralled. I was so excited about writing with the Beatles that I knew the book would be special. So we sold the book. And we sold the book all around the world. And then the next thing I knew, we left Laguna and moved to London. And one by one, Peter introduced me John Lennon was living in New York, but one by one, Peter introduced me to the Beatles and to their ex-wives and wives and girlfriends and managers and agents and accountants and you name it. It was remarkable. And let me just say that of all the Beatles, of the people that I met, Paul was a real gentleman, nice, a sweet man, generous man, caring. I'm very, very impressed with Paul to this day. He just was absolutely terrific. Um, and oh, by the way, answered all my questions. Didn't hesitate. Was a real adult about it. I went to see George at his giant at Friar Park, this giant, giant mansion, which was ridiculous. It was so big. When I walked into this huge, it's like giant halls or something. There were bicycles all lined up. And I said, "Hey, what do you ride the bicycle or something?" He said, "No," he said, "this house is so big that we ride a bicycle to get to the other side of the house." So he lectured me. It wasn't much of an interview. He allowed me to ask him questions, but his answers were always something about the planet and how we're all one. Everything kind of like what you would expect. Um, One of the things that came out of that interview was that of all the Beatles, he took the most LSD. And it had really, really deeply affected him because he did it day after day after day. And so, whatever it did to him, he was very, very much into Earth, the planet, growing things, the cellular structure of the leaves, and how we shared all of that. We sat in his kitchen. He made me a cup of tea. While all this is going on, by the way, there's part of your back, the back of your mind that's going, George Harrison's making me tea. It's just like this other, it was like, so the thing that I said to him that I remember most is I said, you had just a huge effect, George, who everybody did, but George in his own way, on what we listen to, on how we dress, on how we think. And I'd like you, just to show you, George, I said, how much effect you had. I never dressed like this. And I grew this mustache, George, when you grew your mustache. And George said to me, it's about the dumbest thing I ever heard. Oh no, it was the John Lennon thing over again. It was terrible. There were certain things, that you couldn't say. So I love George. George was great. Um, Ringo was hilarious, funny, lovable, just what you would expect, except um, I found he was rather hard-nosed about certain things. I thought Ringo would be easier and more of a pushover and not very smart or anything. But Ringo's opinion held ferocious opinions. For instance, he liked Alan Klein. If you know the Beatles mythology, Alan Klein was a real villain who came in and screwed everything up and made the Beatles really hate each other. And he was for Alan Klein. He didn't believe any of that. And he had very, very strong opinions. So I liked him very much. And then something else happened. Am I going on too much?
No, go ahead. I like the Beatles too. I've done a couple, had a
Oh, do you want to go to, well, tell me when you want to move to the Beach Boys
whenever
because,
you want. You got the floor.
okay, so one thing happened before I interviewed Ringo for the Beatle book, which was I wrote Alice Cooper's autobiography back in 1973. Now, the thing about Alice Cooper in 1973 was he was a giant star because of the snakes and because of everything else. And even, some guy in a rice paddy in China knew Alice Cooper was the crazy guy with so um, uh, um, I was I was very friendly with Alice Cooper. I traveled with him. It became more than just a biographer. Alice used to drink a lot. He's sober now, but he couldn't drive his car. Actually, Alice Cooper has never had a driver's license his entire life. He's always had somebody drive for him. He had this nifty Rolls Royce. It was really great. So when I would go out there, it was through it, the book and everything. And I would just stay at Alice's house, in one of the guest bedrooms or even in the maid's room on a blow up mattress. It was so much fun to be around with Alice. But I would drive the Rolls Royce, and he would sit next to me and stuff. So one day he said, let's go to On the Rocks, which was a nightclub on Sunset Boulevard. And I said, well, it's kind of early, Alice. It's only like 10 o'clock or something. And he said, yeah, but I got to get out of here. So we drive to On the Rocks. We come into this empty club, and there's one person there with a young woman he was dating at the time. It was Ringo. And it was, oh my God, this was the first time I met Ringo. I said, oh my God, I can't believe this. So Ringo's at On the Rocks at this nightclub with this girl, and he sort of knows Alice, and we go over and we start talking, and it's really boring there. And Ringo says, let's get out of here. And he says to Alice, oh, by the way, Ringo, everybody assumes that I'm Alice's driver or roadie, because sometimes very big rock stars, he was at the time, Alice, always had to have somebody with them. They can't like wander around in public and stuff. And it was fine. We played golf. I mean, that wasn't my job, but hell. Um, so Ringo treated me very nicely, but like I was the assistant driving Alice. So he said to Alice, this is next to unbelievable, promise, cross my heart, hope to die, promise on my mother. Ringo says, I'm supposed to shoot pool with Peter Lawford, the movie star, with Peter Lawford. Do you want to come? He said to Alice. So Alice said, sure. So now we're behind Ringo in whatever fantastic car he was driving. He drove himself. And now I'm driving Alice's Rolls Royce, and Alice is sitting next to me. And I'm thinking, oh, the whole thing was too much for me. So we go to Peter Lawford's house, and there's Coke. And there's a topless woman that Peter Lawford said was loaned to him from the Playboy Mansion. The whole thing was just so crazy. So, and she had a big tray and she would pass it around. And stupidly, I did some Coke. I never should have done that, because suddenly it was like, oh my God, Peter Lawford, Ringo, Alice Cooper. It was just too much to handle. And my hands were shaking. And when it came my turn to play pool, to shoot and everything, my hands were really shaking, both from the Coke and the nervousness and all these famous people around me. So Ringo put his hand on my shoulder and said, to the effect of, we're all just friends here. We're all just regular guys. Nobody's anything here. Relax, enjoy yourself. We're just having a nice game of pool. Jeez, you know, he was so sensitive. He's so great. It was so terrific. Instead of like George saying, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard, or John Lennon saying next and getting along. Ringo really was lovely. And so I liked him a lot. And I never got to interview John further than him dismissing me. But I did interview at great length Yoko and everybody else. And that's my impressions of the Beatles. The book took me 3 years maybe to write, 2.5, 3 years, and there's a lot in it. And when it first came out, people were furious because the Beatles was supposed to be super clean, and they didn't have girls, they never got VD, they didn't do all of these things, and people were very angry at the book. As the years went by and everybody got more sophisticated about the Beatles and also about the world, it became the most popular book ever about the Beatles, and it still is. There are over 500,000 copies in print of The Love You Make. So that's the original Beatle book. And
Did you ever wonder why, like in the United Kingdom or just over there, they don't treat the Beatles like as much as we treat them here? Like it seems like we're bigger fans and their music's more popular over here in the States than it is in the United Kingdom.
I think they're pretty popular. The thing is, the English press, the tabloid press, can be very nasty, and they're always looking for a flaw. They're always looking for something that's, you know, and but I think they're loved. This new book that just came out, All You Need Is Love. The first book was The Love You Make, and the second book was All You Need Is Love. Um, it was a bestseller. It was, but they're really interested in the gossip. The thing about the Beatles is the musical genius is going to live far beyond all this gossip. Who cares about Yoko or how much John gave Cynthia in divorce? I mean, that's kind of interesting stuff. But the real thing is music. I don't understand the English sentiment towards them really, but I found the English to be pretty protective of them. So
Why do you think people are like that with their rock stars? I mean, obviously, you're interviewing people, you're being put in situations where you probably millions and millions of people wish they were in your scenario where they could get anywhere close to Ringo or any member of the Beatles. And I'm sure with like the Beach Boys, which we'll get on to, but well, when it comes to interviewing, a lot of the stuff that you're going to see behind the scenes and you get to be involved in these scenarios, it creates a different perception than probably what most of the public sees when they're just listening to songs that they like or going to a concert. That's a different thing. And that's when you write something like the book I was reading about, The Beach Boys. You wrote something that was a lot different than what the others. And I think it's more real because I guess there's tabloid stuff, there's all this other type of stuff or bad stories that come out, but also we can't like expect everyone to be like either 100% good or 100% bad. There's kind of like a balance or mixture in between. And we, like super fans, don't get over that. Like there's fightings online. I'm sure the Beach Boys and the Beatles, I know for a fact, is a small community or a big community of people that have their views and they don't like it when something separates from that viewpoint. Like this is their idea. It's just like Elvis. That whole fan base is there's the people that study the karate side, the movie side, the music side, and it goes into different categories. So I'm curious, do you think that being involved in those scenarios and those interviews helped you understand them a little bit better as people? Maybe not the certain interactions you had, but just understand kind of the fame and what they're just people. They get involved in these scenarios.
Absolutely. They come to life as human beings, not as giant stars, which is really important. I think people are childlike about their heroes, and they certainly don't want to that their heroes have the kind of flaws or the kind of human beings that they're just regular people like us. But there's something else about my writing is that I loved rock and roll, but I never set out to write about rock and roll. I always wanted to write other kind of books or novels and stuff. Actually, when I got my first job writing about rock and roll, I was a moving man in an auction gallery. And I carried furniture back and forth to trucks. And then um, I I read in the newspapers that the rock and roll critic of the New York Sunday News had passed away. And so I called them up and fibbed a little, said that I was a rock and roll writer, and they gave me the job. Here's what the point that I'm making here was I knew nothing about rock and roll. I was a fan. I did not know who played what instrument. I couldn't criticize music because I could say, gee, I like this song. It has a nice melody. But most rock critics at that time were kind of very serious about who played this and that and this riff. And I knew none of that. And one of the first things I wrote was I think it was the soaring guitar riffs of Greg Allman. And actually, he was on piano in that cut, and it made it embarrassed me. And so I decided, look, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to write about the human side. So all of my books have been highly criticized because I don't analyze the music. I say they wrote the song. I might explain why they wrote the song, but I really don't analyze the music. So that's one of the things about all of my books, whether it's about musicians or the other kind of books that I wrote. So that's one of the issues. But
I want to bring it into the Beach Boys now, but I wanted to kind of ask because what you just mentioned, do you think that honestly helps you understand like everyone gets so obsessed with like even with the Beatles, but like with the Beach Boys, what I've been looking at recently, everyone's kind of obsessed with their whole persona on stage, like this kind of whole feeling. I told you I'd went to a Beach Boys concert. Now everyone that was in the audience was way older than I was, and it kind of matched the left two Beach Boys are left on the stage, I guess you could say. But I noticed like the mic getting cut off with Mike Love, and then like it was lip syncing. It was kind of like more of a showy thing. Like they were using him as publicity or like here's the two members of the original Beach Boys. The other one, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he was playing keys. He actually seemed like he was okay. Like he was singing and he was very moving around. But from like my perspective, as someone who heard a couple songs when I was a kid, thought they were interesting, and then kind of actually finally got to go to a show when I'm 27. I looked at it, I was like, they did great. You know, like the band that was with them, that's probably gonna end up being a tribute band at a point. They did fantastic. But looking at it from like a humanistic perspective, I thought it was kind of sad to see that all kind of go on with Mike Love on stage and stuff like that. It just seemed like they shouldn't be doing this. I don't know if they're just doing it for money or publicity, if they're doing it for themselves to keep the check rolling in.
You hit it right on the nail.
But
There's a
again,
time, there's a time to say we're not going to tour anymore. I mean, they're very, very, very rich. I don't know what there's a thrill in touring and stuff, but contractually, they have to be at two real Beach Boys on stage. And even though Mike Love can't really sing anymore, they need him to be there in order to have the contracts. And one other Beach Boy, and I don't know who they're going on with now, but that's part of what you saw, a band that shouldn't really be touring anymore. Their music is just so fantastic. Brian, I mean, it's Brian Wilson was really the genius of that group. But I think that's what you saw. I think you saw the leftovers part of the Beach Boys at concert. And I never really liked them at concert because they recorded music. Well, the same thing with the Beatles. The Beatles stopped touring because they couldn't reproduce the kind of studio sounds that they were making in an arena. And the Beach Boys too should have stopped, and they did stop because Brian was sick. But basically, their music was very, very studio oriented. It wasn't like a loud, and that's because of Brian's incredible vision. So I never, they made a lot of money touring. A lot groups make a great deal of money touring, but that's probably yeah. How old? Let's see. Mike Love must be 80.
the keyboard player is 86. He came.
Oh my
It said
God.
in 1965 was when he was a Beach Boy or something like that. I'm blanking. I guess I'm blanking on who his name is, but Mike Love I think is a little bit older than that. He seemed just like you could tell there was an age gap where I'm like, I'm sure the other one's going to hit that point soon. But it was just like again, it was sad, but I'm sure everyone loved it. My buddy's mom, who we took her to the concert, enjoyed it. She got to relive some stuff. But again, it was like you started kind of noticing that, like, yeah, just let them, they don't need to be touring anymore. I mean, I get it's the original Beach Boys and you want to see them and stuff like that. But and I'm coming across videos of people on YouTube making fun of Mike Love while he's singing, like noticing the mic cut. And I'm like, that's not what we want. That's not what anybody wants with some band that they cherish. So I was actually interested when I came across your book because I was wondering how, just some history about the Beach Boys. And when I came across your book, you had a different take on it. And when did you interact with the Beach Boys? When did you decide that you wanted to write a story? Is that one of those situations that just fell into your lap, or did you happen to know one of them personally?
No, when I was this columnist for the New York Sunday News, I was in Los Angeles every 3 weeks for a week. I went back and forth from New York to Los Angeles. And so I would interview various people. And the publicists, the New York Sunday News had 1.8 million readers. So if I wrote it, and I have my own page. So if I wrote something about a group, uh, everything would go up. The record sales would go up, everything. So they would, when I was going to be in Los Angeles, people asked me, publicists asked me. So they got me to Brothers Studio. I forget what was being recorded, but Dennis was in the waiting room. And so I was able to interview Dennis. And that started my fascination with them. Um, Another magazine, New West magazine out there, asked me if I would write a full feature about them because Brian's life had been taken over by Gene Landy, the psychologist who was going to help Brian's mental problems. And they were making a comeback television show produced and directed by Lorne Michaels of Saturday Night Live. And it seemed like a really big thing was happening. So they asked if I would come to Los Angeles and write this piece about them. So I did so. I flew to Los Angeles and I interviewed Mike Love, who was ice cold, um, strange. Um, he asked me to come back. In order to do the interview with him, I had to go back to his apartment and meditate with him.
I
So
would
I did
expect that
that.
out of the Beatles, not the Beach Boys.
That's the Beach Boys.
I know. I would expect it out of the
Oh,
Beatles, though.
right, exactly. Well, the Beatles were anyway. So I did that. I meditated with Mike Love, and then he did the crazy things. He showed me diamonds, raw diamonds. They weren't raw; they were cut, but they came out of a little bag. And I don't know what the diamonds were about. I could go back and look at my notes, but he was selling them or collecting them or something really weird. Anyway, I got out of there. I really didn't like him, and I realized the only way to do this was really be to get to Gene Landy, and I called my editor and I said, I don't think I can do this Beach Boy thing for you because I don't have access. And he yelled at me. I thought you were a journalist. Journalists always, you know. So I got in touch with Gene Landy, the therapist. He wasn't a psychiatrist, the fake therapist, a terrible, terrible person who was supposedly treating Brian by forcing him to bowl, by forcing him to do regular things. Now, Brian Wilson was schizophrenic, and instead of uh, he had an ignorant family and ignorant friends and people who were just interested in milking him. So instead of saying, maybe something's wrong with Brian, we need to get him help, we really need to get him treatment, they wanted to squeeze every last song out of him. So they said, oh, he just took too many drugs. And they never got him help for a long time. And I mean, he saw some psychiatrists and some people, but it just wasn't working. So I went to see Gene Landy. I could tell right away he was a charlatan and a fraud. And he said to me, uh, if you can get me on the cover of Rolling Stone, him on the cover of Rolling Stone, which I had no association with, I'll give you complete access. So I said, I have no association with Rolling Stone. This is for New West magazine. Nobody said, well, you'll do it. You'll do it. We'll work this out. You'll do it. You'll get me on the cover of Rolling Stone. So I said, okay. So he said, free access. And that was pretty amazing. I was with the Beach Boys, Brian in particular, every day for months. I stayed in Los Angeles. I interviewed ex-wives, wives, the whole thing. And everybody gave me interviews. I wasn't turned down by one single person. And Gene Landy even let me in on psychiatric sessions with Brian. It's totally unethical, but Gene Landy wanted me to see what a great therapist he was. So he actually let me sit in during Brian's. I was a little afraid of Brian. You know, Brian was like 6'2". He was really big, and you could tell something was wrong. And he wasn't violent, but I knew that he could be. And so I was at one of those psychiatric sessions at Gene Landy's office. Um, and he said, I have to go out, Gene said. I'll be right back. And he left the office and closed the door. Um, I didn't know really a lot more to say to Brian. He was very ill at the time. You couldn't kind of get straight answers out of him. So I went to the door to open the door and say, Dr. Landy, you should come back in here. And they had locked the door. Um, so I was locked in this room with Brian. Anybody would give everything to be locked in the room with one of the great musical geniuses of the 20th century. But it really made me nervous. So we did an interview. I have that interview on tape. It's really quite remarkable. And we talked about his dad and his relationship with the other Beach Boys and what things he heard in his head. And um, uh,
When did his schizophrenia really kind of start showing symptoms of?
If you go back to In My Room, the song they wrote In My Room, when you go back to that, you can hear the loneliness. I don't know when it came out full-fledged, but by the time he was a teen, he had psychological problems. And then when he started taking drugs in the 60s, everybody took LSD and all those kind of hippie drugs. Um, it got much worse. And everybody was just milking him, was just using him. But I love the whole Beach Boy family except for Mike Love. They were all nice. I felt a real affection for Brian. Um, he was a sweet sweet person. And I think, and that Gene Landy said that he had to write songs with Brian, and suddenly Gene Landy's name was on the credits of some of Brian's songs, so he could make money off of it. I just knew, and here's a funny thing. Landy says, I'm getting a new client. You know my new client. You know my new patient. I said, who's that? He said, Alice Cooper. He said, Alice Cooper needs to stop drinking and everything. I'm going to treat Alice Cooper. He said, tell him what a good guy I am. So, and I thought he was a fraud. So he calls Alice Cooper. There were no cell phones back then. So he calls Alice Cooper and he says, I got Steve Gaines here, your biographer. And he hands me the phone. And Alice says, hey, hi. And I said, I've got to talk to you about Gene Landy. That's all I said. And so Gene took the phone away from me. And not long after, they found a syringe in the glove compartment of Alice's car. It wasn't Alice's syringe. It was the guy that was watching Alice for Gene Landy. And he had his, I know the whole thing is so crazy. The whole thing is so nuts. So they fired Landy. And then I wrote this book, Heroes and Villains, that has all of this in it. And that was just that was just another thing. I have um, UCLA asked me for my Beach Boy tapes. I have about 80 hours. I have about 200 hours of the Beatles, but I have about 80 hours of the Beach Boys, and they asked me for my Beach Boy tapes, which I did not give them.
It would be interesting to look at those. But I wanted to ask, were you the closest with Brian, or were you closer with any other Beach Boys?
No, Brian. I mean, you can't really be close to Brian, but Brian was, Mike Love. I was afraid of Mike Love glared at me once in a studio. He gave me the weirdest, nastiest look, and I thought, he had punched people in fistfights, and the Love family, Stanley Love and all that, they beat each other up like crazy. So, um, I was really concerned about Mike Love, so I wasn't going to hang out with Mike Love, and I wasn't interested in Carl or anybody. Brian was really the story, and what Gene Landy was doing at the time. So I was closest with Brian, and I also got very close um, to Brian's wife at the time, Marilyn. I just thought of something when I was interviewing one of the executives who had originally signed the Beach Boys and their publishing in the 60s. He told me that fraud had been committed, that the Beach Boys didn't realize that publishing was being signed away, and that their father and somebody else from a music company had pulled this off. And then years later, they discovered that somebody else owned their publishing. And so when I heard all that and they were going to sue and everything, I said, I have a tape that says that it was fraud that I, did when I did those interviews. Um, so they subpoenaed me. It was really bad. They paid for my airfare, but I was subpoenaed to go to Los Angeles and to give deposition and to bring the tape. So I brought a copy of the tape. And I went to Los Angeles and they deposed me and they played the tape and they settled. The Beach Boys got tens and tens of millions of back money, and they settled somehow. The publishing deal was different. And then I never heard from them again. But the guys, I showed up with this tape. I told the true story. I didn't expect any of the money, but I thought somebody would call and say, thank you. After all these years, we got back our publishing. Wasn't it lucky that you had that on tape? So, and then I've never seen them or heard from them again. But if you listen to an album like Holland, the Beach Boys albums, or you even go back to the simpler music that Brian first wrote, like In My Room and all of the great things, um, there's real genius there. I love the album Holland. I love the quirkier, smaller things that they did that didn't really become big hits. Uh, but I still have Heroes and Villains and all that songs, all those songs from that period of time. And I love the Beach Boys family. Just a family from Hawthorne. Anybody can become a superstar in America if you're brilliant.
When you asked Brian about the issues with his dad, did he have detail on it or things of that sort, or was he like cognizant enough to understand to be able to recollect some of the things? Like I have a family
Oh,
member
yeah.
that had schizophrenia and stuff like that. They took their own life, but I understand that trauma and what it's like to deal with someone if they're not taking medication or if they're not being treated properly. It's a very declining thing. So I was curious if when you were speaking with him, were you able to get like, was he cognizant what was going on to him at the time? Did he know he was being used by this psychiatrist, but he thought this is what people wanted him to do? He wanted to be in there or something like that. I mean, it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. It was terrible to see, but at least he was getting some treatment. It was totally, completely the wrong thing. He needed to be medicated, and Landy couldn't medicate. He didn't have a license to medicate. He was a psychologist. And he had been in and out of mental institutions. The thing is he understood, he was verbal, he understood at a certain level, but he was also very frightened about things. And God knows what was going on in his eyes. And you could see that fear in his eyes. Sometimes if somebody has serious psychiatric problems, you can see their eyes look different. I could see that. But he was in touch with what his father had done to him, how beat them up, and he was impossible. The dad, he was really, really a vicious, unhappy man.
This is
And
Murray, right? Murray's the dad.
all right, yeah. But when the Beach Boys were famous and they couldn't got beginning famous and they couldn't stand Murray anymore because they were already making it, but Murray was yelling and screaming at them and making it a family thing. They got together and they fired Murray. So guess what Murray did? He formed his own Beach Boy group. He formed a competing group to his sons, and tried to get that off. So it just goes to Murray was long dead when I met Brian on his birthday. I forget what birthday it was at a big house in Malibu, and his mother was there, so I got to meet his mother and interview her. But the father was long gone, and I could only get stories about him. It's a fascinating story, only because throughout all of this, Brian wrote these beautiful, beautiful melodies, and somebody else wrote most of the lyrics, but um, it's just remarkable. And you can see the outpouring over Brian's death. Not a lot of rock stars die when there's just such a big outpouring all around the world of love and respect for what he accomplished. So
Did you ever ask him how he felt where the Beach Boys were at, or what was going on with the music and everything like that? I mean, obviously he's writing songs, but from the story that I heard, whether Mike Love was being honest about it or not, he gave a little bit of a thing that lasted felt like 30 minutes. But he gave a thing about Brian, and he mentioned about a songwriting process and something like that. But the way you describe him is a little bit different than what he was saying. But I wonder if he was cognizant of what he was doing, or was he happy with what the Beach Boys had turned out to be, like nationally loved, world loved, globally loved. And a lot of people like listen to their music on a daily basis. There's like a cult following behind the Beach Boys. So I'm curious if you were able to get anything to just even see if he could recognize where he was at, like if he knew what he had created had gone so far.
he was frequently called a genius, and he was aware of that, and it worried him. It was a big thing to be called a genius, and he kept on saying, but I'm not a genius." And they keep saying that I'm a genius, and he felt that was very hard to live up to being a genius. So, um, what he said many, many times was, "They're making me do this. I don't want to do this." He was very sick. They made him go into the studios and compose songs. Um, it was crazy. They would take his money away from him. They took his touring money away. Usually, even though Brian didn't go on tour, they still paid him. They took that money away. They used all sorts of control on Brian, and he was aware of that. He knew that, and it made him unhappy. There was nobody even Marilyn Wilson, even his wife, who I think truly loved him, although she was having an affair with his bodyguard. Oh, because which he knew about. I mean, this is a really wild story. But even Marilyn didn't. They just wanted him to write more music. It was that simple. He was a money machine. He was the goose that laid the golden egg. And they didn't really treat him well until they got everybody out of the picture, and he's got on medication. He found a lovely woman who, would be his mate in life, and things calmed down for him. And if you got to know him, he was just a sweet, soft, gentle man inside. When they got him calmed down from the medication and stuff, he was just a lovely guy.
Do you think we would have gotten the amount of songs we have by the Beach Boys if Brian would have just stepped back and actually got the help he needed? Do you think he actually would have picked it up and wanted to make music again? It seems like even being forced to do it a little bit, even though you like the process of it, it seems to me he just enjoyed making the music rather than actually putting it out there. And, sadly, you need those people that suck it up as the corporate side of it that pushes it out there and makes it turn into something. But I wonder if we would have the amount of Beach Boys songs that we have if Brian was able just to actually get the help he needed and he just wanted to retreat away.
What do you think? Do you think that the schizophrenia, um, I mean, songs like, the big psychedelic kind of songs, do you think that came out of schizophrenia? Do you think he wrote his sad songs out of mental illness? I can't tell. What do you think?
I don't know. I never met Brian to be able to give you that insight on what maybe he was thinking at the time. I can only look back from a younger generation. I think I don't know. They all to me, I don't. Music's music. They're gonna find its audience somehow. I just wonder, based on from what I've kind of heard from your explanation of just your interaction with Brian, I would have to feel like if you're getting forced to do something, you lose the edge and the fun of it, and it kind of loses the essence. Pressing yourself to like, I got to sit down and write this book. It's going to be done by this amount of time. That's not the same thing as just waking up in the middle of the night and be like, I got to get this down. I got to get this process or what's in my head down. And I feels like with musicians, my whole family's musicians. So I understand that process and how it is. You can't just force yourself to do something or you're going to end up hating it. Making a song, we got to sit down and write this because this rent is due. That's not fun. You want to be able just to sit down or wake up in the middle of the night and be like, I got this idea, I got to get it down. And Brian seemed like more of the type that just wanted to get it out when he had to get it out.
I think Mhm. I think that's true, and I think they kind of ruined. I think Brian did want to get it out, and I think he was full of melodies and full of musical ideas and everything. But once they started to put the pressure on him, and he started to get sicker, I think that just twisted everything and ruined it for him. You know, Hmm. You said something about when you write a book, people say to me, "What's your inspiration? What's your muse?" And I say, no joke, my inspiration for writing is the mortgage. And so, um, you have to pay your bills, but Brian didn't have that problem. They were already multimillionaires, so he wasn't doing it working for the money. But the others were pretty greedy. And so, sometimes I think he wrote beautiful songs in when he was ill, but I don't think he could have been enjoying himself much. I met a man who was really, really miserable, and at that point in control of this egomaniac, Gene Landy. So, it was pretty sad at that point, and it's one of the great composers, though, of all time. If you go back and, by the way, if you look at the Beatles, and if you look at the documentary that was done about them, that wonderful documentary, they just, Paul and John literally stood side by side in a studio and they plunked away. And you could say to yourself, oh, that's going to be this song. I know. And then you realize that those two guys, they made up songs, brilliant, beautiful, classic songs, just by plunking away. And that was not what was happening with the Beach Boys. It was really horrible who got to say what and do this and who was in charge of the music. And they treated Brian badly. So um
Did you ever try and like describe this or like I'm sure with your book coming out, you probably get some criticism of from some fellow Beach Boy loyalists or something that don't want to acknowledge maybe the dark side of things. I mean, you're explaining a humanistic and what I'm probably sure happens a lot more than we know of in the industry when it comes to the music industry with certain bands, maybe. But I'm curious, did you ever want to just try and speak with or trying to communicate what you experienced, show them like, hey, I have tapes that show this is proof and this is this? Because I'm sure with your books, how many people wanted to remain anonymous when they were giving information for these things about the
Only
Beach Boys?
only Mike Love's ex-wives who had a
How many does he have?
well, there were a lot, and
Uh,
there were three or four, and there was also let me just see. Do I have the Beach Boys book? Yeah, hold on for a second.
Man, you're making me hate Mike Love.
Hold on. Okay, so um, Mike Love beat up some of his former wives, and and so that's why I'm just trying to I just want to read to you the um
Well, now I'm glad there's a guy making YouTube videos about Mike Love lip syncing.
here this is when I was in Dr. Landy's office with um was deeply grateful person. Brian is rawly honest, and revealing. A child man, terribly vulnerable to journalists and strangers, alternately frightened and eager to please. At the beginning of our first interview, he stopped me after just two sentences. I don't know why, he told me. I'm just thinking of ending the interview here and letting you write the story. He wants to, here's what you just asked me. Um, I did over 100 interviews conducted exclusively for this book. To my great regret, several sources with firsthand knowledge of the Beach Boys' personal and business lives refused to be identified and would only agree to be interviewed anonymously. For these people, I'm indebted for their insight. However, for that reason, I have to caution the reader that a character's inclusion or exclusion in the scene does not necessarily indicate that they contributed to the book. So there you go.
What I figured out the guy's name was Bruce. Yeah, Bruce
Johnson?
Johnson. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
one other one that remains, and he was actually seemed like he was doing the actual work for the Beach Boys. Like he was actually singing, and was seemed like he was okay. That's why I was
Great
wondering.
musician, not
Yeah.
a part of the original, but he wrote I write the songs that make the whole world sing.
Yep.
He's and he they made him part of the group. And I don't think I interviewed Bruce Johnson. I'm not sure I did, or that I had the time to, or that I had the inclination to.
Did you get the chance to get Dennis? I always heard he was kind of the crazy one.
I did get the chance to interview Dennis. Very much. Actually, the book starts with Dennis's last day. Then what I did was is I traced every single moment of Dennis's last day. I found all the people, all the restaurants, and everything. The moment that he jumps into the water, we know he's going to drown. I love Dennis. I really did love Dennis. He was brash. Um, uh, he was a little. He needed a bath. He smelled like the ocean. He was a real guy, and he was very, very, very drunk and high. Very, very, very drunk and high. But I liked him. I loved him. He was great, and I liked those tapes. And we talked about Manson because somehow he picked up a girl on the road. She was one of the Manson girls. Manson wants to record. He got them in Manson involved with the Beach Boys. This is a story that's been told before, but I wanted to find out what he thought about all of that. Oh, and I know Karen Lamb, who is the gorgeous, gorgeous woman. She's dead now, unfortunately. Who was married to both Bobby Lamb from Chicago, and then when divorced him, she married Dennis Wilson twice. They got divorced once, and she also set his Porsche or his Ferrari on fire. I mean, it was just this crazy, crazy romance. But um, I loved her. I mean, I really fell in love with her. She was great. The first day, she lived in Venice. And so the first day I interviewed her a little bit or something. She said, let's go for a swim on the beach. And I said, I don't have a bathing suit. She said, you're wearing underwear, aren't you? And I said, yes. She said, well, that's enough. So this is the first time, it's so weird. So Peter Lawford was not there. So anyway, the first day I went swimming with Karen Lamb in my underwear. So in the ocean, nobody cared at Venice Beach anyway. But the thing is that I made a deal with her. She gave me all of her diaries when she was with Dennis for $10,000. Um, so see, I wouldn't pay anybody any money for an interview because they could lie and stuff for an interview, and I don't think it's appropriate. But she had all this written material in diaries, and so I felt that she didn't have any money, so I paid her $10,000 for Karen Lamb's diaries, and that's an amazing portrait of Dennis Wilson and what he was like. They were all violent except for Brian. All those and, well, I don't think Carl Wilson was violent, but certainly um, Dennis beat up a couple of women and was really heavy into drugs and stuff. I'm so sorry he drowned. Um, but he was another tortured soul.
Do you think the drugs and alcohol was from the childhood abuse and just growing up with Murray and having that influence or that type of person around you?
I don't know. So we have so many addicted people in America who don't necessarily come from those kind of tough backgrounds. I think a lot of it just had to do with being in the music business in the time when there were hippies and LSD, was a very, very big thing. All those drugs had come to the fore. People were smoking come to the fore. People were smoking marijuana for the first time. I was in Los Angeles during 67, 68, when the Beach Boys were really, becoming popular and everything. I just think it was part of the world. Some people got hooked. In the 80s, it became cocaine that people in the music business did. But I think the psychedelic, and I don't think it was because of their dad. I think it was just time for psychedelics. Some people it affected more than others, and I think it really hurt Ryan psychologically.
Yeah, Timothy Leary's model was to open up the keys to the kingdom and get everybody a key, but it probably should have been checked a little bit better because I don't think everyone probably needed a key. If you know what I mean by that, there were some people that obviously had bad reactions to it. But it's so interesting. My buddy and his mom didn't even know when we were at the concert. I was like, I heard there's like a Manson. I've had like Tom O'Neill and others that wrote books that kind of bring in the whole like they mentioned briefly, like in the new documentary about Manson. The connection with the Beach Boys and then goes into Helter Skelter and all that type of stuff. But I mentioned that to them. They're like, that's not real, is it? And they looked it up and saw it. Do you know a little bit about like what the actual, so it was just him picking up a girl and it was just a,
He picked up a girl. He went back. They brought him back to wherever mansion was staying at the time. There was an orgy. Dennis liked all of that craziness. There were a lot of drugs. And Dennis became pals. And Manson wrote a song, which and Dennis brought him to the studio and tried to get Manson involved with the Beach Boys thing. And the song that Manson wrote, I don't know the name of it right now, but is on the B side of a Beach Boys single. That they actually published Charles Manson,
I,
the Beach Boys.
I don't know. I gotta Google that because I
It's
know
so it's
Manson
so weird. Let's see if I can find Manson here. I hate to do this while we're on the air, but I can do this pretty
ceased to
quickly.
exist,
Cease to exist. Perfect song for Manson,
and
huh?
they retitled it "Never Learn Not to Love."
Well, I guess after the murders, 201. So let's see. Um,
Oh, so apparently Brian and Carl, uh, yeah, they were to address tensions between Dennis and his brothers Brian and Carl. Manson didn't attend the recording session, or he did attend the recording session but did not participate. That's always been weird to me because I know with like Boogie Losi tried to talk about it was something about the Beach Boys and some type of madness or anger he had, and then another whole other situation with like a movie. I'm just like, that seems convoluted and a lot. I don't know. I feel like it has to be more simple than that. But I guess I mean you're a rising star, and that's another issue. Like you look at Dennis's life, you're talking about drugs, alcohol, everything a rock star kind of falls into. Same thing with like Elvis. You know, you look at it's dopamine though, but it's like it's just something. It's something new. It gives you excitement, and you're doing something different, and it's very adrenaline rushed and very thrill seeking. Was he so obsessed with just wanting to be famous, or was he just interested in all the cool things that were giving him this feeling? You
You
know,
mean Manson or Dennis?
Dennis Manson's a psychopath. I think he had a probably
Oh
different
no,
notions of.
boy. Let me just read you one thing. Charlie Manson, as the girls told Dennis earlier that day, was a musician of great power and talent. He was also a philosopher, a leader, and a prophet. As it turned out, Dennis and Manson had a lot in common. Manson was a musician, so was Dennis. Manson hated the blacks. Dennis didn't care much for them either. Manson liked young, innocent-looking girls. They were Dennis's favorite too. Manson spun a vivid and convincing scenario about the apocalypse. In the near future, he told Dennis, there would be a worldwide race war. And so he became friends, and then LSD, all that other stuff came into it. So I did interview one of the girls. I did interview one of the Manson girls.
Oh, I got to hear
Yeah.
about that.
It was hard to track her down, but I finally did. I forget what a weird name it was, and that she was using then. Maybe it wasn't so well. Maybe it was Crystal. It wasn't her real name, but I did, and I go interview her, and she was defensive about what they. She hadn't taken place in the murders, but she was defensive, and all the women like Dennis. He, he was. I guess he was good at lovemaking. I mean, and he was handsome, and he was a rock star, but he was drunk all the time.
When you mentioned earlier, I kind of want to ask you this as like a wrapping point. You've given me plenty of your time, and I do appreciate all the time you've given me. But you mentioned that you knew he was going to drown when we're talking about Dennis. What did you mean by that?
Well, um, I was writing another book that I wasn't having fun with when Dennis drowned. And so my publishers said it was a non-rock and roll book that I was writing. So my publisher said, "You're so unhappy writing this book. Dennis Wilson drowned. It'd be a great follow-up to your Beach Boy book." So I knew Dennis had drowned, to your Beatle book. So I knew that Dennis had drowned. So that's what I meant when I, as I said, when I followed Dennis minute by minute, or I followed what Dennis did minute by minute on the last day of his life. I knew that when I got to that dock, that there was no boat there at the time. It was just an empty slip. But I knew that was the place, that was the moment where he jumped off the boat to dive down and to find memories from lost years and everything. I just knew that was this horrible place where he would never come up again. And I interviewed the people that were also on the boat at the slip next door, who Dennis was friendly with, um, and how he kind of snuck vodka out of their boat or something when before he jumped in, and what that was all about. So that's what I meant. I knew that I was standing in a place where he had passed away. So that's basically what I meant by that.
How hard was it for you to deal with that situation, interviewing those people on the boats, knowing, that Dennis drowned compared to maybe another situation like interviewing Brian and knowing that he's getting kind of taken advantage of by a fake psychiatrist?
Oh, Robbie,
I don't want to be put in those scenarios. That's
no,
why
you're
I'm
not. I'm
asking it. I
just
know
telling you,
as an
journalists
interviewer,
are
I'm just saying that I don't know how you dealt with that. And that's where,
journalists have a real journalists can be exploitive. I don't think I was writing a story about, but you have to have a lot of guts, a lot of nerve to call up, say, and oh, hi, Mr. I know you saw Dennis Wilson drown. I'm writing a book about it. Do you want to give me an interview? People hang up on you. People don't want to give you that information. Um, you have to show that you mean well, and you have to have a lot of guts to call up strangers like that and say, "Tell me the story." And sometimes it doesn't happen right away. Sometimes you have to go back a week later, or you have to bring flowers or something, or give them a copy of my Beatle book and say, "Look at this. This is the quality of the book that I want to write about the Beach Boys. So it's very hard, and you're being intrusive. You're asking people about sad moments in their life and difficult things that happen and a man's mental health and stuff like that. So it's very delicate and dogs. So it's very delicate and it's a hard thing to do. And I've wrestled with my own conscience through many, many, many years and many different books about what I was doing and how appropriate it was.
Yeah, I meant that. I meant that with the utmost respect. I've interviewed like 9/11 family members and people that have lost someone, and it's very difficult because you're not trying to pry. You're not trying to. You just want to understand more. And especially you were closer, like you were close to Dennis, and then also, you had to go interview people that knew Dennis or knew maybe more about the situation. You're getting answers. That's a difficult situation to be in, but it's also like how your mind works. If you are used to writing books or if you're used to speaking to people to get information out, you're kind of going through your own stage of grief in a way, but you're really just trying to get more facts for yourself. And also, if you're going to put it in a story or if you're going to leave a record, I mean, we have records. Thank God we do for some ancient stuff that someone decided to write it down, even though at the time everyone else probably thought it was insane. So, like, I understand, like, I was trying to, that to me, that was the interesting part because trying to understand what that was like for you to go through that because you're emotionally dealing with Dennis is gone, but at the same time you're trying to figure out what happened, and then you also have to kind of go over the thing of like not trying to come off as prying into somebody or questioning somebody or interrogating somebody. You're just trying to understand. And again, that all comes out later, and everyone thanks you for it then. Because when you write the book and everyone's able to read and be like, "Oh my God, I understand a little bit more." That's when the
I
thank
think
yous
I
come.
think I think you're being nice. Thank you, but I think there's something really negative and bad about investigative journalism. I mean, if you're trying to right a wrong like 9/11 or find that, but if you're poking around in somebody's life, and I know that they were superstars, and I know how important this book has become to people to have this history about the Beach Boys, but there was a lot of times in my career where I felt like, what are you doing? Or when you call up somebody and ask them for an interview and they hang up on you. I can't tell you how many times in my mind I quit this career because I felt that I was snooping or not, and it's a big responsibility, especially because you know that tens of thousands of people are going to read, what you've written about these people. So um, I'm not sure that St. Peter's going to call my name and invite me up.
I think
So
you'll get a ticket. I think you did it with some nice.
before we go, I just have one story to tell you. This writer dies, and St. Peter appears and says, I'm taking you to heaven. And the writer says, "Oh, I'm so pleased." He said, "But do me a favor, since I'm a journalist, I'm really curious about what hell is like. So would you just show me what hell is like?" So St. Peter says, "Sure." And suddenly everything's on fire. The ground, the air's on fire. There are all these writers and they're burning up. And there are people hitting him, with the whips. Um, and he says, "What is this?" And St. Peter says, "This is writer's heaven." He says, "Oh no." So, and that's how I always felt about, there was an editor whipping me and I was burning up and this was a terrible world. I love your show and I would be happy to come on and talk to you about
The Beatles.
the Beatles and at great length
Yeah,
if you
we will
can.
set that up for sure. I'm so excited I was able to talk to you a little bit about them, but also about the Beach Boys. And I appreciate the work you've done, interviews, getting these stories, the tapes that you have, whether you put it into a documentary and you release it. Can't I'll be counting the days till that happens. But you have done great work, and I'm very appreciative of your experience and you sharing it with me. If you can, let everyone out there know where they can find your links to your website. I know Amazon has your books. I'm going to make sure I link everything in the description below so people can be able to click to find out.
You're very kind to me, very kind. And my website's stephengaines.com. It's easy, my name.com. Thank you again.
Yeah. Oh, dude, thank you, man. You got so many stories up there. I bet we're just tapping at the mine right now of them.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking about them.
But I'm going to link all your links in the description. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blanket. Stay tuned for our next episode.